It's great to see so many of you here. Thanks for joining us at the end of the first day of the Ready for webinar series. A quick note that certificates and a recording link will be sent to you all after the session. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your clip meeting window. I won't waste any more time. It's my pleasure to introduce Stacey and Gina. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Ready for What's Next webinar series from Pearson English. I'm Gina Pontrelli. I'll be presenting today with my colleague, Stacey Roberts. And we're part of TELA, which is Pearson's Teacher Education and Leadership Academy, producing professional learning programs for teachers of English and all subjects globally. We're sharing a presentation today derived from one of our on-the-go modules. And these are short, bite-sized modules for busy teachers like you, focused on evidence-based practice and practical strategies on one particular topic at a time. We do build every module with subject matter experts with deep pedagogical content knowledge. We promise, as you know, to leave time for questions. If we don't have the answers, we will certainly reach out to one of them and get right back with you. And we encourage you to reach out to us with any questions or comments, following this as well. Okay, and today we're going to unpack our module on scaffolding in the ELT classroom, be it face-to-face or a virtual classroom, and how to use scaffolding to bridge and help close the gaps in understanding and progress that exist among all of our students at various times in their learning. In this session, we're going to take a closer look at examining how scaffolding can help students reach lesson goals, exploring how scaffolding supports understanding of new language, learning how to use scaffolding to support specific language skills, learning how to plan scaffolding to help students move from form-focused practice to fluency-focused language tasks, considering ways to monitor performance and provide additional scaffolding, remove the scaffolding, or increase the challenge. So what is scaffolding? It's anything that provides support when a task becomes difficult. So imagine a bicycle. When we reach a hill on a bicycle, we can use the gear to climb the hill. We can just shift, and that hill becomes possible. And for most of us, it may not be possible to climb a really steep one without those gears. Students encounter challenges during language lessons. That's the fact, right? And so to continue to move forward, most students need scaffolding to be able to manage these challenges. We're going to play a quick video that sort of animates this idea. Charlie, can you please play this for us?
As they move through a language lesson, our students may encounter barriers of many kinds. Scaffolding provides the specific support that students need to be able to take each step. Sometimes students have difficulty understanding new language. To help our students access new language, we can build background first to help them connect to their existing knowledge about the topic. We can also ask them to connect to their first language when processing new language. This doesn't just mean translating new words, but rather helping our students
Hi there. Sorry, I noticed the audio was sort of echoing, so I'm just going to pause it and start again, or at least from here. Let's hope that resolves it. One moment.
Students identify cognates or similar expressions.
It's doing the same thing, so give me one moment. Let's see if...
You know what? No worries. We can just move on, Charlie. Really, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, right on. Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, but I'm going to tell you so much better than that video anyway. I don't need it. Okay, so it's important to note that scaffolding is really beneficial for all of your students as they're learning something new. So it's good for the many different levels within your class. It's not about changing the learning objective or the lesson aims to make them easier. Everyone is still expected to meet those. It's about providing supports at the right time and place that make achieving those aims possible for everyone. It's a planned approach to differentiating instruction while keeping the task and objective level the same. So Now that we've got a brief overview of what scaffolding is, let's put it into practice, and let's move through the next few slides and keeping these questions in mind. We're going to start with lesson planning. And as we think about that preliminary step, ask yourself these questions. What do my students need to know for a given objective or aim? What challenges might they experience with that? How can I break down the learning experiences into stages that I can support? And when can I remove scaffolding? While it's a very good idea to have challenging lessons and lesson activities, because that challenge maintains engagement and moves learners forward, it's vital that we think through the steps that our students need to complete them. So thinking through your lessons isn't anything new. But perhaps we can increase this intentional teaching move or scaffolding by really looking at the plan with the lens of, wait, these particular parts of the lesson are going to be tough for my students or a group of my students. I already know them and I know that. So rather than taking a chance and hoping it all comes together and risking students shutting down and disengaging, we can provide the extra steps or aids needed for learners to make it through those sticky spots and ultimately accomplish the full lesson goals. So in language learning, no matter the student level, scaffolding is almost always needed to help them access new language input, have sufficient opportunities for exposure and practice, and carry out tasks in which they actually use that new language. In our classrooms, both face-to-face and online, we can incorporate scaffolding activities and strategies to embed new vocabulary and move from form to fluency. So let's look at a few examples of these activities and these strategies broken down by the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And then we'll take a look at how this works in an example lesson plan. Beginning with listening, by scaffolding these listening tasks carefully, you can help students focus their attention and overcome barriers to understanding. If we want the task to have meaning and build skills, we need to add deliberate teaching moves. First, there's going to be unknown language, so we need to help students access and understand the language in listening tasks. We can build background by providing images, carrying out quick interactions or polls, or showing short videos with lots of visual information. And you can see how these strategies really lend themselves to online or face-to-face. We also need to ensure the activities are pitched at the right level for our students and that they contain the specific language that we actually want our students to focus on. Then we define and clarify listening tasks. So providing a specific purpose and task in advance allows students to focus in on what we need them to. Also, dividing those tasks into smaller steps will help students focus their listening. We want to avoid giving students other tasks while they're listening. And if you need to provide additional support to students then, just as in the last step, try giving them images or diagrams to go alongside the listening task. And finally, we need to provide extension activities after listening practice to help students apply what they've understood. Be sure to engage with students about the topics in the listening task by asking questions and giving students opportunities to extend what they've understood. Turning to speaking. Sometimes students can be reluctant or even afraid to speak in English. I'm sure you've all seen that, especially in front of others. And if we scaffold speaking sequences in our classroom, we can prepare and support students much more. So first, we must provide language practice before speaking. And to do this, we practice the language elements and forms that students will need in controlled exercises. This practice can include meaning-based exercises such as matching, classifying, and ranking, but also form-based practice with exercises focused on spelling, pronunciation, and word building. And next, we need to carry out extended controlled practice with extra support. So we can do this by modeling speaker exchanges with our students and then asking them to practice with a partner using choral repetition or speaking cards, highlighting key words, using facial expressions and intonations that will help embed that new language. And then we want to move from repetition to personalization in conversation models. So practice conversation models using substitution and personalization, which entails asking students to replace key information with other possible information and guiding students with word posting or images to increase support or challenge. And finally, we must support free communication activities. You can model an interaction for the class and provide support based on the student's needs. Posters, word postings, images are all great. And set up communicative tasks so that students must carry out spoken exchanges. It's important to establish a communicative outcome based on meaning, as this will give context and direction to your students. Now let's look at some examples of scaffolding activities and strategies for reading and writing. Reading, students often come to the English classroom with undeveloped reading skills, which they may bring from their first language. These scaffolding steps can help students tackle written texts and be transferred to the mother tongue as well. First, we must select appropriate reading texts. It's important to select texts based on the student's language level and interests. We want to choose texts that are slightly above that level in the zone of proximal development to provide challenge, but remember to provide a glossary or pre-teach new vocabulary. And try to use authentic looking texts that students can identify, like menus, web pages, newspapers, or advertisements, and use these to help students connect to their existing awareness of text types. And then we need to define and clarify reading tasks. So focus students' attention by assigning the full task, but then divide the task into smaller steps. And then remember to explicitly teach reading strategies so that students can use them on their own, such as look at for previewing something, or what's it about for main ideas, and find the information for details and the specifics. And then finally, we should be providing extension activities after reading practice. This will help students apply what they've understood. You can ask them to write about a favorite character or scene from a piece of fiction, or replicate texts with their own examples like menus or advertisements, and encourage students to give their own opinions and share experiences. So let's look at writing finally. It's important to adjust writing tasks also to use the student's age and level of literacy in their first language. For all students, we can carefully set up steps before, during, and after writing. And this is how we can provide students the needed support to become more comfortable with this skill. First, it's key to select authentic writing tasks. So again, as we just discussed for speaking, try to set up authentic writing tasks that students may have come across in their daily lives, such as newspapers, blog posts, text messages, signs, letters, stories. This will give students a purpose for their writing and build engagement with vocabulary because of this purpose. Pre-writing steps are really important. So preparing to write in one or several pre-writing steps to help students cope with writing tasks. And these steps should get them to map out the information you want to share, and even the order that they'll share the information. So you can start by creating word bubbles, for example, or word drawings for younger students. And this generates ideas, and then ask the students to create sub-bubbles. And this will help them build that narrative of what they'd like to write about. And next, they compose, draft, and revise. So you want to leave plenty of time for this step of the writing process. Most students will need a model piece of writing to get them started. As they become more skilled in their own writing, they'll become complex and varied, but they'll still need models. And that model that you provide is the key scaffolding here. Encourage the sharing of drafts and model effective feedback with your students. And importantly, take the time to make polished drafts by encouraging students to keep rereading and finally adding illustrations and graphic elements. And don't forget to extend those writing tasks. So once students have completed their writing, create opportunities for others to enjoy reading them, posting them on a class blog, school class magazine, notice board, and have students keep writing portfolios of their drafts and final work. So by this final kind of piece of it all, they really see that they've met that goal. They've met the writing goal or the reading goal or listening or speaking, but we've provided these scaffolding steps along the way to make them successful in that final product. So celebrate the final product. And we'll provide handouts to you, and you'll get this recording later. So you have these strategies to refer to when you're building your lessons. We're not used to presenting new information without opportunities to discuss, but with so many of us here, we've been asked to have you use the chat feature, and we'll try our best to answer your questions at the end. But I know this is a whole lot of info just flying at you. So let it settle, maybe jot down some notes if something speaks to you, and know that you can refer to the handouts or the recording at a later time. So next up, we're going to take a look at an example lesson plan and consider how we can use some of these scaffolding strategies and activities that we've just shared. So you can see here in this lesson plan how the teacher scaffolds both the presentation of new language and the practice exercises using the new language. At the very beginning, the teacher's already building background before the presentation of the new language. So you can see that here they're giving students a quick survey, post these questions. What's your favorite food? When do you eat your favorite food? And this, by referring to this previous language taught about food, you'll be activating what they previously knew about the topic. Then the teacher moves to the presentation of the new language by using visual input that we discussed before. So asking the students, do you like any of these foods? Show pictures of the healthy, very healthy, unhealthy, very unhealthy foods. And it's possible to include, other kind of ideas like slightly healthy to promote critical thinking. But the important part is to really include these visual images in this first part when you're providing this language input. And this helps them understand the new language that they're learning. Another scaffolding strategy we discussed, when it's appropriate, you can ask students to make connections to their first language. So here you see the teachers planning to ask if there are any words that are similar to their first language. And then the teacher moves on to repeating the new language multiple times to give students many opportunities to hear the new language being used. This repetition is a scaffolding move we discussed in our speaking section to help stabilize those skills before you personalize and extend the task. So you can see here that this helps students, we're saying, help students connect to the vocabulary by asking individual students, do you like this food? Is this your favorite food? And you ask several students this same question, going over all of them. And the teacher then provides students with visual information about the language they need to practice. So you can see here with group work and matching the word to an illustration. If at this point it's appropriate, you can increase or remove the level of scaffolding by either providing further supportive information or removing the images to increase the challenge. So we'll talk about taking some of this scaffolding away when it's appropriate, but that's an example of just very simply, you're showing the images while it's still needed. You're not taking any of the challenge away from the task, nor are you reducing the output and what you're expecting the students to achieve. But you're providing this sort of step stool below it so that everybody can stand up and reach what they're trying to reach. Observing students understand after each exercise really reinforces what the student has learned, but also provides you the opportunity to assess whether your students need more of the scaffolding. Maybe they need less or in the next exercise. And this is, of course, our formative assessment that we're doing consistently as teachers as we're observing, but it's really important with scaffolding because that's going to be your cue to when you need to add more or take more away during a lesson. But clearly we want to plan for it intentionally, as you see here, and then continue to roll this out throughout the lesson. In this lesson, the teacher then moves on to asking multiple questions to both reinforce the learning and continue that assessment. And then once the teacher's confident that their students are able to practice this new language alone, an independent or paired exercise is introduced. The teacher also provides a model for their students to follow and introduces a new piece of vocabulary to provide challenge. So throughout, you will have noticed that there is really a lot of opportunity for varied scaffolding activities and strategies. We simply have to strategically include them in a basic plan, because that basic plan is not always going to account for the gaps that will exist. Your pedagogy and teaching skills in richly scaffolding your students' experience will be critical in closing those gaps. Charlie, please, now that we've looked at the lesson plan, we're going to take a look at this, at some questions. And we've got a poll that we would like you to consider.
Excellent. Is this the first or the second poll?
The first, please.
The first poll would make sense. So this is the lesson plan poll, yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. So you should all be able to see the questions in front of you. If you could fill out your responses and then click submit at the bottom of your screen. You may need to scroll down to reveal the submit button. There we go. A couple of you coming in now. Brilliant. We have got responses in, but I'd still suggest another, perhaps another minute or so. I've set this up as a single choice, Stacey. I've got a feeling this should be a multiple choice, shouldn't it? I'm really
yeah.
That.
That's okay,
So,
not a problem.
Can we still work with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, fine. So perhaps select the most relevant, we should say. Perhaps. Sorry for
Well, actually, it is going to throw you a bit. So I'm just going to, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answer, because you're probably all well aware of it now as you're reading it, that they're all correct. And you wouldn't have been able to select them all. So I didn't want you to get frustrated.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, those of you that were trying to select all, you see that we do want teachers to use visual support. So showing images in places where the word appears. And the teacher was giving the students the definition of health, because providing definitions is also a critical part of pre-teaching that vocabulary. The teacher also connected to the students' existing knowledge by showing places that they might be familiar with. And the teacher also translated the word health into the students' first language. So all of those were things that were evident there in terms of scaffolding. And if we do another poll, we will be sure to talk you through that as well. But hopefully that helped a little solidify what you saw in the lesson plan and the ways in which this teacher was really sort of utilizing a number of different scaffolding strategies. Okay, so moving forward, it's important to sort of consolidate all of this knowledge. So as you reflect on the strategies and activities that we've looked at, please continue to think about how they might help your students. How does building background at the beginning of a lesson support students? And it would be great, actually, if you have some ideas right now, throw them in the chat. We'd love to see them. It's certainly something we'll keep. What are the specific strategies you can use to help students understand new language? We've talked about a lot of them, but there might be more that come to your mind and some that you've used. And how can you connect to previous knowledge and language? We know that this accessing prior knowledge and accessing what they already know gives students something to sort of hook onto in their memory and bring forward to the new learning. How can you model this new language support to your students? Is modeling something that you are all doing in your classrooms, both virtual and face-to-face? And is this something that you perhaps have some tricks and tips for? And how can you check work and confirm answers before moving on to the next step in your lesson? And this is that formative assessment that we've discussed. So remember, we'll provide some handouts that include some strategies for these teaching moves, but I'm sure you've got more. And it's really the most important to consider the questions themselves, as you've just done, and then plan for them based on what makes sense for that lesson. So the key is just to make sure that you've attended to each of these in your plan. So we've looked at scaffolding the content itself by building strategies and experiences into our lesson plans. And now let's turn to a few scaffolding teaching practices that will layer onto that plan and ensure that we're giving the learner every opportunity to succeed in our face-to-face and online classrooms. So the first is scaffolding our own teaching instructions. Scaffolding our own instructions involves dividing up our teaching instructions into smaller, immediate commands. So just as we've been giving you lots of information, and I feel the need to really break it up and discuss it, even though we can't, it's that same type of idea that if we give just so much information at once, we really do risk losing a lot of students. So we break these up. These scaffolded instructions can really help students better understand what to do in each activity. It's important to use clear, direct language and deliver instructions in a way that all students can understand what's being asked of them. And it's also good practice to ask one or more students to relay back the instructions to you so that you know that they've understood this task and that they've relayed those instructions. If the student hasn't fully understood your instructions, this is your chance to amend them and make sure they do. And then monitor students as they carry out the instructions and provide support immediately. If we consistently deliver instructions in this way, students will be able to predict and follow typical instruction sequences much more easily. So how do we do it? During lesson planning, write out the actual instructions you plan to give students for each step or exercise or activity in the lesson. And then envision your students executing these instructions. This is really, really key. Sounds very time-consuming, but really helps understand what they're going to get and what they're not. So you want to ask yourself, is the language I'm using for my instructions simple, clear, and concise? Do my instructions point students to one immediate step and action rather than multiple actions and longer sequences? How can I model the instructions, and how will I ensure that students understand them? How will I deliver the instructions? Who will students need to work with? Will grouping arrangements be part of the instructions? What problems, barriers, or challenges might students have with these instructions? How can I anticipate this and prepare to provide support? So prepare your instructions by answering the questions and write out exactly which instructions you will give students and how you'll deliver them. And you may not need to do this after a while, but if you practice fleshing out this level of detail, you'll be amazed at how you can start anticipating the needs of all your learners. And by adding in scaffolding where you anticipate gaps, you will have a much more engaging, successful, and connected experience with your students. And now let's turn to identifying when and where scaffolding is needed. Observing students during tasks really enables you to understand whether they need more or less scaffolding support at that formative assessment we've been talking about. So what do you need to look for during these observations and these appropriate times when you're assessing whether our students need additional support? You're looking for whether students have difficulty in completing the task. They might not even know what they have to do to get started. You're looking for students that might be using their mother tongue. You're looking for students as they may rely on their classmates to know what to do. And some students may need more time to complete the task, or they may not complete the task at all. Conversely, how do we know when it's appropriate to remove scaffolding and increase challenge for our students? It's important to use these cues to go the other direction as well when it's time. So when we observe that students can complete the tasks we assign and those things that we just looked for, right? They're actually doing it the first time you give the instructions, and they're not relying on their native language. They're not relying on their neighbor to tell them everything. They're really just starting to progress and move forward. And we observe that our students can complete the task we assign like that. We know we can continue with the next steps of our lessons. And when students are able to complete these tasks well like that, we can start removing the scaffolding to increase the challenge. Again, we're not increasing the level of objective or aim. We're just increasing the challenge of the steps along the way. So what we want to do is increase that challenge for a short period of time, or possibly just for some specific students. For example, we might scaffold learning providing images or flashcards in English when students complete exercises or interactive language tasks. And then when students have internalized this vocabulary and we see that they're meeting the tasks, we can remove the visual reference and challenge students to remember the words they need, or even to remember other words that they may know to fill in those gaps. And this can challenge students with real-world language use. So where the additional support of images, flashcards, word posting, etc., are simply not there for them. We do have to be careful not to frustrate students. So you want to test the waters. We can remove scaffolding as a special challenge exercise, for example. Temporary challenges may be beneficial because we really need to observe students closely at this time. If they become frustrated because we've removed the scaffolding too early, none of the newly acquired learning has a chance to embed. We can also extend tasks to deepen language practice. For example, after practicing new language successfully, we can review previous topics that fit into the task. If we have asked students to write about their hobbies, for example, we can ask them to include their favorite sport now, embedding key vocabulary that the student has just learned with newly acquired writing skills. And another way to make tasks more challenging is to set up temporary limitations. For example, we can ask students to use very specific vocabulary, a certain amount, say 10 words, 5 sentences, 3 ideas. And we can ask the student to use specific sentence structures. We can also remove visual support, for example, using audio only instead of video and audio. And by providing extra support or removing scaffolding according to student performance, we can really challenge students according to their needs. So now let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned during this session. And I want you to please have a think about the next few questions and make a note for yourself to refer to later when you're implementing scaffolding in your lessons. I'll go slowly so you can capture some, and I really recommend that you do. Research suggests that taking these immediate notes really increases recall, even though we think we'll remember. So, how do you think scaffolding might help your students? What barriers do your students often encounter during lessons? What do you think the source of your students' difficulties is? How do you think scaffolding can help you address these specific barriers? I realize these are really big questions, so hopefully you are jotting down some notes. Which scaffolding strategies do you think would be most helpful and why? Okay. Now we're going to move on to a quick quiz to see if we can remember what we've learned in this session. Again, using the poll function that Charlie's got set up for us. This is, let's see, I trust that you've got this set up the way it should be because I don't exactly know. This is the second poll.
Okay, are we looking at the right one now? Good, lovely.
Yes, we are.
Is that correct?
Yes, we are, yes.
All right. Okay, if everyone please take a look at this.
Yep, we're getting. You can't see the responses, can you, Gina or Stacey?
No.
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 Okay. We've got votes coming in, and I can share the results perhaps after another minute.
Okay.
So we're getting lots of responses, but I can see that people are still answering. So if you guys are happy, we'll give them another sort of 15 minutes.
Absolutely.
Great.
Stacey, can you look at that chat?
I am. Yes, I can. There have been some absolutely fantastic responses and some fantastic questions as well. And I know that Charlie has been, I'm hoping Charlie's been keeping a record of some of them.
Okay, great.
If not, I can scan through. But there's been some great kind of comments on how teachers themselves deliver scaffolding, and for some teachers this is completely new. So I'm very happy that that they've been able to join and that they get much more out of this session.
Great, great. Okay, and then I just put something in your chat, Stacey.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So would you guys like to be showing the responses, the results in this one? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thanks for your responses, guys. Just about to end that and sharing the results now. So you should all be able to see the results in your screen. And again, if you scroll down, you'll reveal all of the questions.
Yep, so for question 1, what is scaffolding? Yep, 34% of you are correct. It is extra support to aid students. Although some of them can be used, I suppose, throughout to give a challenge or to remove specific tasks. And yes, images and diagrams, which looks like everyone who has taken the poll does include images and diagrams in visual information. So yeah. And yeah, the majority of you went with when should scaffolding be provided? Yes, it should be during class, just because of that immediate feedback to students. Oh, okay, this one, question 4 was a bit divided. If students don't understand the instructions, the teacher should give the instructions in the student's first language. We have 21% saying true and then 17% saying false. The correct answer is true, because if students don't understand the instructions in English, you are going to have to provide more scaffolding, and if that scaffolding means giving the instructions in their students' first language, but then asking them to answer in English, is a way of scaffolding your instructions. So true is the answer to that question. And then the final question, it is not a good idea to repeat information in different ways. It doesn't help students pay attention. And the majority went with false. So that is correct. By giving students the same information in different ways can help students comprehend and understand the language that they're learning. So thank you, everyone.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, a lot of you did not take it, so you have to take it at home now tonight and send it to. No, you don't. Wonderful, thank you. So that brings us to the end of what we wanted to present. And again, we will we have a couple handouts that have those strategies. Very excited to read what you've written in terms of responses to those questions, and your own ideas and how you do this, and also take an opportunity now to try to answer any questions. And as we said before, we will do our best to answer, or we will get those answers out to you. And I know Charlie will get something out to you at the end of the session as well, if we need to send correspondence. But is there anything, how are we handling, Charlie, you're handling the questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple here. And again, if there's some here that you guys can't answer, we can follow up by email. So just let me know, and we can send them out. So the first is my question's about the modules. Are these an additional or free to this series? How can I access these, please? So this is referring to modules that you talked about quite early on in the slides.
Right, absolutely. Oh, we would love to share more of those, more information with you. We have, my goodness, we have about 40 on-the-go modules, so many different topics. Some are ELT specific, and some are really just sort of some generalized pedagogy, like effective questioning or differentiating instruction. And each module is delivered online. There's a lot of activities. It's very practical, but these are not free, unfortunately. We just extracted, as I said, the content to provide this. This didn't include, obviously, all the visuals and all of the activities. It was just the content from the module. And I think probably going to, let's see, Stacy, should we go to send an email to tella@pearson.com, or what do you suggest is the best place to get more information?
Yeah, what I will do is I will post the Tella PD email address in the chat box. If you do have any other questions, please do email, send an email to that address, and either myself or Gina, we do man that inbox, so you'll most likely be responded to by us. But I will pop that into the chat box now for you all.
Perfect. And then we can send you the brochure. We can send you any of the information that you want to try to access them. Thanks, Stacy. And thank you for that question. Okay.
Okay, great. So I presume the second question is asking about those online modules also, and I presume that will be the same link as that.
Yes.
Great. So one here that I'm completely unfamiliar with, so you're going to have to do all the talking. Is scaffolding the same as Bloom's taxonomy?
Oh, that's a great question.
Does that mean anything to you?
Yes, it does. It does. It does. Okay. So not really, but it's a great question. So Bloom's taxonomy refers to a level of cognitive development for students, for learners. And the higher levels of Bloom's, those are the higher order questions, the higher order thinking that we want students to get to. So that's when they're analyzing and using critical thinking. The lower levels of Bloom's, that's remembering something, recall, understanding something. All of them are very important, but Bloom's designed this taxonomy to try to help teachers provide a way in. So in some ways it seems like scaffolding, but really to provide something at every level. So it's not meant to always, travel up, but you are wanting to, you do need to provide something at all of them. But if there is a critical thinking activity at the top, it doesn't mean that the lower level is going to scaffold that. It doesn't mean that that's the sort of training wheels or step stool that you need to get there. And so it's a little bit different. Scaffolding is the same. You're still going to have the same learning objectives as we talked about. Scaffolding just implies some additional teaching moves that will help the students be able to do that. So it doesn't mean that they need to do more remembering or understanding or lower level. It means that, as we said before, perhaps they need to see a visual image at the same time that they're listening to the word, so that they're able to recall what they knew before, so they're able to kind of connect it to something that they know. It's in that way, I hope this is clear and not doing a great job. It's not a step. It's, the Bloom's taxonomy, you don't do the lower ones to get to the higher ones. So those aren't scaffolding the higher ones, but you are doing, in scaffolding, you're just providing some additional support for students to get to the same task. I can probably write something up that would be better than that, but I'll start there. And I'm glad you asked about Bloom's, because it's another wonderful tool to use as a teacher, and to really making sure that you're eventually helping your students get to those higher level and do that higher level work. But there's always going to be activities at these different levels. Okay.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more.
Okay.
Yeah. It seems that scaffolding and differentiation have many things in common.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Totally agree with that. Really great point. Yeah. I would say that scaffolding is sort of a method to differentiate. It's something to include in your teaching repertoire to differentiate. And we all want to be, we need to make sure that we're attending to those different levels. I think one of the interesting parts of scaffolding to me is that everyone benefits. So even your range of students at a very high level in your classroom are going to benefit from having the picture alongside the word. There's nothing that's going to take away sort of their accomplishment. And so it's something that you can do for everyone, but you do want to pull these scaffolds away, maybe for those advanced students or maybe for everyone, as you see that they're able to meet the learning goals. But yes, very, very similar, many overlaps. And I think it's really a great observation. Stacey, did you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. Even when you're not teaching English as a language, using differentiation and scaffolding with students can help in any and all subjects. and lessons. So yes, I agree with that statement.
Cool. All right.
We still have questions coming in and comments, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. So we're going to have to call it a day there. But Gina, Stacey, thank you so much for the time in putting these slides together and delivering the session.
Thank you so much, Carly, for helping us, and thank you everyone for joining. And please do write to the email that Stacey's providing, because we, Stacey and I, and anyone that we that we need to pull in, will answer your questions, get you information, get you linked up to modules, whatever it is we can help you with. So nice to have you. Thank you.
Fantastic, and thank you all for joining us, taking the time out of your days for this Pearson English webinar. Just a very quick note, certificates and a recording will be sent out. There is currently an issue with the certificate software, and we apologize for that. We're working to resolve that as soon as possible. As soon as it is resolved, you'll be sent a new certificate. I can't say exactly when that should be, but it won't be too long. So thanks very much for your patience, and we hope to see you at another Ready For webinar. Good evening.